Conversations from the Yurt.
Conversations from the Yurt.
Episode 1.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious to know, Toban, for you, like, what it was in your life that you, for you, that you were like, okay, I choose this path of doing what you're doing now, of helping others, or the life counseling.
I wonder if we choose our path, or if it chooses us.
Okay, so how did you know? What was the moment that you knew? For example, then like it chose you or something. If that's like what you're saying.
Oh, the fire is great now.
It's very alive.
I don't know, actually. Do you know? When did you decide that this is what you wanted to do? Be a therapist? Is there a certain point?
Yeah.
Because you said you were going to do farming with your wife originally, right? So something changed there?
Not originally. To be honest, like, life's taken many different directions. But this has been the thing that I've consciously chosen.
Nice.
And really opened up to kind of doing that thing. And of course, it's often easier to do a lot of other things in my life. But it's like, this is what I actually want to do, and this is what I choose to do. And this is what I actually get a lot of joy from. And but you asked the question, when was it for you? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Like, because the way you said it, you made it sound like there was like almost a certain point. And I think that it's interesting if it even is like that. So I was curious to hear, did you have like a certain point, like a turning point?
Yeah. And I would say, like, there was a lot of things leading up to this.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just this one point, but I guess you could say this was like the tip of the iceberg or something. And that was that was when I was at experience, I guess some form of burnout or stress or whatever you want to call it from the work that I was doing. I was actually also working like 15-hour days for like, I don't know, a year or something. Christ. And so naturally my body and mind and also my emotional thing was just completely very low, I guess. And I started to ask the questions in my life, like just really going to asking myself, like, what is it that I would actually want? Like, what could I do if I could do anything at all in this world?
Right.
And it was like, there was no money involved. There was no nothing. It was just like, what would I do?
That's the $1 billion question.
Yeah, that's the $1 billion question, right?
Such a good one.
And it's easy to make when you have the $1 billion, but we don't have the $1 billion. But yeah, so that for me was.
I think we asked for that though, but we'll get back to that.
Yeah. Yeah, so for me that was the moment, that was a turning point where I asked myself that question, and what came up for me was like, helping other people in some way.
Yeah.
And that's so broad because you can help people in so many different ways in this world. And then I just started kind of going down that rabbit hole, I guess, and started talking about it with people close to me in my life. And somebody actually mentioned, what about like kind of therapy or counseling? And at first I was like, there was a big barrier against that. And I'm not sure if it's because I'm a guy and growing up in like Australia and it being kind of like a
manly culture.
Yeah, like if you go to therapy, you're considered weak or something, or like something like that. And that was pretty strong in me, right? So then that took some kind of time to kind of work with that. But when I started going into that, like researching into that, like being a therapist and things like that, I could really resonate with that, and I really kind of felt into like, wow, that could really be something for me. Yeah. And that was the turning point for me in my life that led me to today, and working as a therapist and being here. So
I think for me, I think the answer is that I think sometimes we talk about how we use narratives to structure our lives in our past. We talk about that we're telling a story, and if we take control of that story, we can tell a story which empowers us instead of something that makes us weaker. So we kind of look at what happened in the past, where we're going, and we structure it all into a story, into where we're going. And I think that I've looked back at my life so many times that I'm not really sure what's real anymore, what happened, what didn't happen, and when it happened, and when it didn't happen. So I am unsure of how I got to this point, because every time you re-examine a memory, the memory changes. I don't know if you've heard about that. But basically, every time you revisit a memory, the memory changes a little bit. So our memories become more and more inaccurate. And we're always telling stories. We even when we're not doing it intentionally, we're telling a story about our lives. And then we can do it intentionally, and it can become an empowering story for us. But the truth is, when I look back at my past, I'm not really sure what happened anymore. Like there are certain factual things that I know happened at certain times. But if you're asking me where I was in my inner process at any given time, I just don't know anymore.
No.
Because I've revisited so many times, I've changed the narrative so many times, I've put things into new perspective so many times. So I'm actually not sure. The only thing I can say for sure is that it just gradually kept popping up again in my life, that sometimes when I talk to people, they felt better, they got better.
What can I ask? What kept popping up? And then you also mentioned something now with talking to people and they got better. Is that like?
Yeah, what kept popping up was that I kept coming to situations where I realized that when I got to help people to motivate them, to get them to feel special, to get them to feel capable, to get them to feel like they had some kind of magic they had to give to the world or whatever. When I was able to make people feel a little magical, that made me feel happy and magical. And it came up in various ways with friends and with people that I would talk to on the internet or whatever, when I was talking about my experiences with meditation and Zen and all this. And when I was a teacher for a while, the students whenever I had one-on-one conversation with them, and there was sort of a mentoring role, I just kept realizing that what I liked was, I really liked mentoring people and getting them to a point where they became happier in life. And then often they would be happy, they would feel grateful to me because I'd helped them. And that made me really happy, because the two things I love most in life is to see people happy and to see people that are happy because I am there, so to speak.
Yeah.
So to know that I had made a positive influence on someone else's life is for me the most gratifying thing in the world. And it's not because I'm a good person, it's just I'm just wired that way, that's what gives me pleasure, that's what makes me happy.
Seeing others bloom,
like you're making a hand movement right now, like a flower blooming. That's like, I've described myself as a human gardener before, because that's really how I feel. I give them everything they need to grow, and then they turn into their own unique flower. And that gives me so much pleasure, and of course it gives them so much happiness, because they finally feel like they're becoming what they should be, right? So the truth is that it was always an ongoing process for me. And I suppose if there was a turning point, it was at my last job, where I had ended up in some customer service job again. Because after I stopped teaching, I was just on a wayward road. I was
doing different things,
going everywhere and just all over the place. And on my last job, I just realized I can no longer do the thing that society expects me to do, which was at this point dead-end jobs, because there was nothing else available due to the job market for academics at that time in my field. There was nothing else than that. So I realized that it had become impossible for me to continue doing what society wanted me to do, and that my dream of starting my own thing, which I'd also considered impossible, was just as impossible as it was for me to continue in what I didn't want to do. So what I wanted to do was suddenly no harder than what I didn't want to do. Then I had the realization that why the hell am I struggling so hard at what I don't want to do, when the only reason I'm not doing what I want to do is because I'm afraid of struggling so hard and potentially failing. I was already failing in what I didn't want to do. So that was the turning point for me to truly start. I just dropped everything and I went for it.
Yeah.
Because I realized I have nothing to lose, because I'm already failing at what I don't want to do.
Either way, you were failing what you were doing.
Exactly.
And you had the idea that you were going to fail what you really wanted to do.
Exactly.
So there was nothing to lose with.
I was struggling with meaninglessness, and I could be struggling with meaningfulness. So it was such a non-choice that once I realized it, all I had to do was go through
take action.
Well, it wasn't just a matter of taking action, because I was so afraid, doubt. Money's always been a big trauma in my family. And I had no money at the time because of how I was living. I was going back and forth between jobs and all this. So there was a tremendous amount of uncertainty and fear, and it was a psychological death in many different ways over the months. So that was the hard part. But I was already feeling almost as bad doing what I was doing. So logically it was the right choice, and then the whole thing was to try and come to a place where I could emotionally be in it, because emotionally it was very difficult. But the way I've always worked with emotions is to just give myself time to just land in them and allow them and sink into them, and allow whatever pain there is to just dissolve over time. And so I just, little by little, I became comfortable in this situation of absolute chaos, which is still what I'm in now. But now I just don't really think about it anymore. So that's...
Can I just ask a question? Just because, people listening along here, might find this interesting. I certainly find this interesting about, the way in which you work with emotions.
Right.
And that when you were just talking now, it sounded like there was a lot of really difficult emotions or feelings coming up for you.
Yeah.
That, for the average person, or for a lot of normally we would not want those emotions.
Right.
And try and push them away or try and avoid them. And here you are telling me, or explaining this, of how you actually process emotions, or in that time at least.
Right.
And perhaps with your clients as well, is that you actually give them time to allow them to be there.
Right.
Can you talk more about that for a second?
Well, I think for me, what I did was, I've always been a lover of truth. Truth has always been the thing I loved the most, was whether something was true or not. And so I had these values when I was young, and so I tried to cultivate behavior that was congruent with my values, which took a long time. And one of the behaviors I cultivated was that I don't believe that fear is a true emotion. I don't believe that shame is a true emotion. I don't believe, in other words, that any negative emotion is true. I believe that negative emotions are pain. And that means if I want to do something but I feel fear, shame, or whatever it is, then those emotions are not supposed to stop me from doing that thing. So
what are they supposed to do?
Well, they're simply a result of past traumatic experiences, which means the natural Torbjörn would not have these emotions. So I'm experiencing emotions that do not count. That's the first thing. The first thing is that I don't believe in negative motivation, negative emotions. I simply don't believe in them. So the first thing is I would decide that I was going to do what I wanted to do, because what I want to do is a positive emotion. It's guided by desire, it's guided by joy, it's guided by all the right and the light feelings in me. So I would listen to those, and if the negative emotions came up, I would not consider them to be true. I would consider them to be a lie. And so what I did was, I simply tried, little by little, to take the actions I wanted to take, or to take small steps towards them.
Yeah.
And then as the negative emotions were triggered, I would sit down, find some kind of calm with the breath or the body or whatever, and then just allow myself to relax and let these emotions just be there and these thoughts be there, and find peace with the emotions as they were. And this calmed down my body, and this allowed the emotions, because I was sitting and feeling them and relaxing with them, it allowed them to slowly dissolve. And so what happened over time was that all my negative emotions went away or became so small that they were not disruptive. And then I was free to be free and guided by those positive emotions that I believed in. So, and I consider, once I had to explain to someone how I deal with emotions, and the image I used, which some people will be familiar with, is I used the image of an ice bath. Now, when many people get into an ice bath, they jump into it, they tense every muscle they have, and their mission is to stay in that ice bath as long as they can without feeling anything. Their mission is to not feel the cold water if they can. So they jump down, tense up, and they hope to sort of keep it away by protecting themselves and tensing up.
Yeah.
Now, the way I get in an ice bath is I put my foot in and I feel what it does to my foot, and I accept that feeling. And if my foot tenses up, then I relax that. And if it's painful, then I accept that pain. And I just slowly get into the ice bath, accepting every part of the experience, being aware of every part of the experience, sinking into it, relaxing into it, how my emotions are reacting, how my thoughts are reacting. My body is shivering. I become aware and I acknowledge the shivering, and I find peace in it by letting it be. I do the same with emotions. And there are certain emotions that are much, much worse than an ice bath. There are emotions, it is possible to feel intensely that you're going to die. And such emotions can last sometimes. I don't think anything's ever lasted more than a few hours, but very rarely.
For example, panic attacks, or kind of.
I guess people would call them panic attacks.
Yeah,
yes,
something kind of like.
I had what? Yeah. Looking back, they were probably panic attacks. Actually, I would lie in my bed at night and I would intensely feel that I was going to die at any moment.
And you would also believe that, because if your mind's saying you're going to die, and your heart's racing, and you feel like you're going to have a heart attack.
Of course, everything
in your body physiologically is pointing towards that. Everything
did, but what I did was I opened myself to the experience completely. I said, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die. But I'm going to surrender to this fear, I'm going to sink into it, and I'm going to be with it. And it's sort of childish, but do you know the litany of fear from Dune?
No.
Okay, so it's from a book called Dune, the movie as well, and it's something you say to help yourself against fear. So you say, fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings something great destruction or whatever. I must not fear. I will allow the fear to come over me. It will pass through me. And when it has gone, I will turn my inner eye and see that where the fear was, only I will remain. it's something that's not. I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember.
Yeah.
But that passage from the book is actually completely correct. That's what you do. You allow the emotion to be there completely, and then little by little it will dissolve. But that's my experience.
What I keep hearing in the different things that you just mentioned now, which is super powerful, right? It's like this sort of like what the normal way of reacting to those emotions that you mentioned,
right.
now, to shame, to fear, to you name it, is to kind of push it away or suppress it or avoid it,
right,
or do everything we can not to have that.
Right.
And it sounds like what you're talking about here is actually doing the opposite of that. It's like
right.
opening up. It's like accepting it.
Exactly.
It's like welcoming it into into that moment, or into the presence of what that feels like, and really kind of feeling that. And that's what I kept hearing from what you're.
Right. That's exactly That's exactly it. But Jonathan, interestingly, you've been in similar situations lately. You went all the way from Australia to Denmark, and you have your
got my yurt.
you have your whole project here with your farm and your therapy and all this stuff. You've also subjected yourself to a lot of chaos, both inside and outside.
Yeah.
So how have you dealt with it? Because you seem to be, you're telling me that, there's a lot to do and all this stuff, but you seem generally to be pretty much at peace with what's going on. So what have you done with these emotions, and what kind of emotions were you up against in this whole ordeal?
A lot of pain.
What a lovely to see the fire in this dimly lit hut, by the way.
It's got a special feeling about it.
With the wind blowing outside. If only our listeners could join us here. Maybe they will one day. But
yeah, you never know.
Indeed.
It could be an upcoming event of some sort, retreat or some kind of workshop day. Or
yeah.
I hope they get to come at this time of the night, because this is a very, very special feeling.
This is wonderful.
Yeah. But to answer the question, to event, I felt a range of emotions.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And what I imagined and thought was going to be somewhat. I never thought it would be an easy process, moving to Denmark from Australia and the whole migration thing, but I hadn't realized what was in store for me, I guess. And
did you imagine what was you had an expectation that it was going to be all right, that you had it handed, or
you know how it feels like in summertime, right?
Right.
When things are
romantic,
alive, romantic. It's like it's all up, I guess
right.
You could say. I was also having a baby at that time. There's a lot of really a lot of things that I was looking forward to and excited about. And then shortly after, there came the opposite to that. Right. And basically just a lot of things I was all of a sudden faced with, which was extremely challenging from an emotional point of view. And actually, to be honest, I just I went into like a fight or flight kind of response to that, I guess. Yeah. And try to fight it. Right. And I experienced a lot of pain through that experience. And how I dealt with those emotions eventually was to just bring them into my life, I guess. And maybe I can say it in a more like kind of concrete way. So basically I was faced with a challenge and I'd experienced like, a lot of, I guess like hardship in a way, some kind of hardship, right?
Yeah.
And I just reacted to that very emotionally and got very much in my head about things, and it took me on like a journey of just like a lot of pain. And eventually I worked with that by just really opening up to that, what I was feeling, and talking about it with other people, and just expressing how I felt about things, acknowledging that those feelings were there. And I stopped fighting, and I just started kind of noticing these feelings or thoughts, and choosing to have them, and that's okay, and choosing to like do the work, which for me is a lot about opening up to them, to how I feel in different moments, and that can be extremely challenging when in a relationship.
How so?
How so? Well, I hope my wife doesn't hear this podcast. No, but in a way where it's like, in a relationship, it's like I'm so emotionally invested in that relationship. So when the other person says something that frustrated me, or like kind of hit a nerve, you could say, or like kind of pushed or kept pushing in a certain pain point, I guess you could say.
Right.
Then it kept kept kind of reminding me of that emotional pain, I guess you could say. And
relationships are hard.
And relationships are
so hard.
Yeah. Well, if you're listening and you've been in a relationship, which is a lot of people listening here, then you know exactly how that feels. And it's.
But if you're single, maybe it's not so bad. Consider that.
Could you recommend that to her?
That was a good question, Jonathan. Could I recommend that? I think everyone can use some years single, but I think ultimately love is more fun.
Brings out the most pleasure and the most pain.
For sure.
And I guess in that time they brought out a lot of pain, and it was a lot to work through, a lot to navigate. And I think this thing with the emotionally kind of working through those things brought the most amount of peace afterwards.
Right.
And it's also been the hardest work for me. And so hope that answers the.
So it sounds like we did the same thing. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I mean, you say.
And it's not the easiest path, to be honest, at all.
But is that
people.
True?
Maybe it's easiest. Maybe it's easier.
What happens if you?
It's like this, right? It's like this. Right. That we're not taught this way.
Right.
It's like.
We're taught the opposite, actually.
We're taught the opposite from teachers, from psychologists perhaps, or from friends, or from everyone around us. Is like, positive. And it's like, so then what happens when you have the negative emotion, the negative stuff inside? And for years,
the taboo of our society.
For years, I actually would try and suppress that and put that away not talk about it. And I realized I was missing out on so much.
Yeah.
Because that also limited my connection with other people and with myself.
So much.
And so for me, my work that I do on myself and with the people that come to see me is really about emotionally opening up. And for some, it's easier than others.
Yeah.
And for some, there's so much history, resistance, barriers, masks there that it can take take longer, but when people do, when myself or when other people do start to open up in that way, they can be like literally like the things, the life or the world opens up as well at the same time.
It is like a flower opening to the sun.
Yeah.
We think that when we become open, we become vulnerable, and there is some truth in that.
There is
some truth in that, but if I look at the last year, how many times have I been emotionally hurt, and how many times have I received deep emotional fulfillment from talking to people, sharing, for example, with someone like you, sharing, heart to heart. I don't think I've been hurt once, and everything else has been that.
So it sounds like vulnerability has actually been the key to creating a really strong connection with others and fulfillment, like you said.
Vulnerability to me is the alpha and omega of life. It's one of the, there aren't a lot of teachings on life that are, what do you call it? What is that word for when something arises again and again?
Reincarnation?
No, it's, well, I forgot the word, but oh well. But vulnerability, yeah, that's such a big one, and it's interesting because no, I don't want to talk about this. I think. What do you have, Jonathan? Do you have anything? We can also just be silent.
Might be a bit boring for our listeners.
Yeah, we'll edit that out. Oh, but one thing I do want to talk about is that you mentioned relationships.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things in relationships is that when you're having a hard time, when you're feeling pain, it's so easy to blame the other person. Because often they look like they're the ones that's creating the pain. They're actually pushing a button that you're carrying on your sleeve. Someone's gonna push it no matter what, because you're rubbing up against everyone you meet in an emotional way. So it's just a question of time. But what I found in my relationships while I was still in the early stages of consciousness was that I would over and over blame my own problems on my partner, because it was so much easier and they were so close. And it was much easier to blame them than to take responsibility, because the pain was so great. It's like a fire inside me. That to sit with it myself, everything in me was trying to get me to throw it on someone else because it was too much for me. And what I wanted to say about that is that, first of all, I want to say that relationships are just hard, because humans are just, to some degree, we have an instinct about following the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance is always to blame other people for our problems. And when we have someone so close to us, it's so easy to do. Maybe you tell them, maybe you do it in your mind, maybe you yell at them, maybe you retreat from them and become cold and distant, whatever way you do it. But it's so easy to blame the other person, because some emotions, we may simply not be ready to sit with them on our own. They may still be too much for us.
Yeah.
And that's I think everyone in a relationship deserves to give themselves and their partner a lot of compassion, and to understand that some emotions are simply too difficult to handle at a certain time.
Yeah.
Because we do terrible things to each other because of the emotions we can't handle. And while we should always take responsibility, it's not the same as taking the full guilt of it, if you know what I mean. You should be
so you're saying responsibility in a relationship is different to feeling guilty about that emotion about that.
I think we get traumas from our past, and our parents and their parents, and these intergenerational traumas and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that we have a responsibility to fix those traumas so we don't take them out on other people. But I think we need to distinguish between guilt and responsibility, because I don't think we are guilty for having them. I don't think we asked for them, and I don't think we ever were the reason that we got them. It was things that were done to us. So I don't think we should feel guilty, but we should feel responsible. That is to say, we have to somehow distinguish between taking action and making it better, and not going into deep self-loathing for the terrible things that we sometimes do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, not taking responsibility either. I think it's a very fine line, but I definitely see people like myself who felt a lot of shame and guilt for something that was essentially beyond their control at certain times. And I see people who feel no responsibility for these learned behaviors, which they actually can do something about. And I think we have to find a middle way in relationships where we take responsibility, but we also have compassion for ourselves, because we really are being controlled by these things sometimes.
And because these things are so controlling us, like you said, and are so important in relationships, also like you mentioned, what would you say is like a step towards taking responsibility, or like some of the first steps, I guess you could say, of like of that path of?
I mean, I'll be honest with you. With one of my partners that we chose to break up in the end, but and looking back, we probably should have never been together. But if I think back, if I would have wanted that relationship to continue, what I would have done is, of course, I already did a lot of work on myself, but what I would have done is I would have gone to a therapist. Because I believe, in my experience in my own life, is that you can do the work, you can become more aware, you can meditate, you can do all kinds of things. But to break a relationship pattern that is negative is almost impossible at certain times in your life. Simply can't do it. Because it's so, the compulsion to follow these patterns of attacking or defending or fighting or fleeing or whatever it is every person has with them. These patterns can be so strong that you simply can't break them on their own. So if it was me going back, if I wanted that relationship to succeed and I was going to do it over, I would have gone to therapy 100%. And we would have done couples therapy, and then we would have had someone be an intermediary between both our traumatic selves, because
they was able to identify and notice the different traumatic.
Yeah, and just bring in some space and interrupt the process, because I'll be honest, like I spent the last 16 years working on meditation, awareness, emotional understanding and processing. And when I was in that relationship, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't stop myself. I was just stuck in a loop. And that was a very humbling experience, and I felt a lot of shame, because I ended up, as I'm sure many people can relate to, I ended up being the opposite of the person I wanted to be in that relationship. And that was when you hear stories of hell, sometimes when you fight with the person you love and your relationship has problems that lasts for a while, that can feel like being in hell. Like, I've tried many things in my life. I've tried many very painful things, but nothing has been as painful as when me and the person I love were trying to claw each other to death, emotionally.
Yeah.
Because we no longer had any other choices. Our intelligence was gone.
Yeah.
That to me was like hell.
And it was like the emotional, reactive part of you was just taken over.
It was just some kind of vicious reptilian intelligence that was at work. And I you know, there's nothing wrong with reptiles. I don't want to compare them to this.
No.
It was like a really, really vicious, you know, rat backed into a corner kind of thing. Just, you know. So that was truly hell, and so I think we should delineate between guilt and responsibility, and I would like us to normalize as a society this couples therapy thing.
Normalize couples therapy.
Yeah.
As a way of breaking that cycle.
Yeah, because
in
we
the
just
relationship, like
because we just
attacking each other.
Yeah, because we just end up repeating our parents' patterns that we never asked for in the first place. We need to get out of that, and it's so difficult on your own.
And it's and at least and I also just want to say for a moment, like to come to these kind of awareness of these things that are from our parents or from our like cross-generational trauma stuff. It's very different to come to it yourself than when somebody from the outside, such as a therapist, is able to go into that with you, like guide you into that, and by doing so, bring an awareness about that, so it becomes very clear what to take responsibility for, or what to become aware of. That because a lot of time, at least I notice in my relationship, when things get heated, I just react. But from what place is that coming from? And so to understand that, which is where the therapy kind of comes in, is somewhat fundamental or key in that process or working through those. Yeah.
I think we as a species, we should admit that we carry an enormous heritage from our past as animals and from our past as very, very savage races. And I think we should become more comfortable allowing other peoples to, you know, be intermediaries in our lives and help us transition out of that past, because we are trying to wake up in these, you know, skin bodies, these astronaut suits. And these suits, they have their own intelligence, and it can keep you running around the same stump all your life if you're unlucky, right? Some people never get out. They just continue
stuck in a loop. They're
stuck in this. Their life problems are the same all their lives. They repeat the same themes. They repeat the same roles. And all they ever get is the same thing again and again, and it's a tremendously sad thing.
And that can be very painful when it's in relation. Well, in other areas, but especially relationship stuff.
It is.
When you go into relationship after relationship and the same
thing,
issue or problem keeps coming up again, and you try and fix it by going into another relationship, only to come back to the thing that hasn't been worked through.
And I think it's a circle of hell. I really think, like, I think of Dante's Inferno with the 9 spheres of heaven, the 7 circles of hell, or whatever it is, and the one in the middle that I forgot, Purgatory. I really think that we.
When you talk about this, it sounds so brutal.
No, but
I guess it is in a way. It's pretty brutal.
No, but we live as people. You know, the different circles of hell have different themes of, like, you know, greed, wrath, lust, or whatever. And we think of that as sort of mythological, but there are a lot of people that are stuck in a circle of hell that means that all their relationships are characterized by anger. And they continue that from they are born till they die. That is being in hell as far as I'm concerned. And then there are people who, through luck or whatever it is, manage to free themselves, and then they go upwards and they live in some kind of sphere of heaven. Like, I definitely feel that where I'm living now is one of the spheres of heaven, and I used to live in hell, and then I used to live in purgatory for a long time. And now, not everything is perfect, but the people are nicer, things go smoother. When I need something, it's almost always there. That certainly feels like a kind of heaven to me. And I see these friends that I have used to have that they're still mucking about in purgatory. They can't commit. Are they going up or are they going down?
But taking the choice.
And I feel tremendous pity for them because they just don't, they don't understand their position. They don't understand what they're doing, but they can't seem to get out because I guess they're not ready yet.
And that's where it comes down to a choice to get out.
Yeah.
And it's also a choice to commit. And when you are going through relationship challenges or any challenge for that matter in your life, the choice to go and see a therapist or do something about it or work or like commit to something that's going to do something different to what, or create a different kind of thing in that area of your life, can be scary. It can bring out a lot of stuff.
No, it can feel like death.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's why we rarely change until we feel there's no other option.
Yeah. Yeah. Till the cost gets so big. But that's, coming back to the relationship stuff, it's like, what do you choose? Do you choose to keep being in this loop that's stuck,
right,
of like pain, of anger, of just back and forth?
These two children, these two emotional children that want love and then end up fighting instead. It's such a tragic. It's so tragic because whenever someone's fighting, what's really going on? One is saying, "I want to be loved." The other one is saying, "I want to be loved." And then what happens? They end up
the opposite,
tearing each other to shreds.
And so this path of love, or this kind of the thing that you really want in a relationship,
right,
that you're not getting. It's like, what are you prepared to do, or what do you choose? And of course, we choose that. We choose that when we first meet that person,
right,
when we first kind of fall in love with that person, and it's very present and very there. And for some reason, as the years goes by,
right,
things come up, we get triggered, we become more ourselves, whatever, and there becomes different parts of us that we may not like in the relationship. And it's like, if you had the option of coming back into that love, would you choose that? And would you what would you be prepared to do to commit to that?
Yeah.
And
that's, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
And that's when you said earlier, do you want to be single? Because I'm single right now. And the thing that I wanted to say is that after my last relationship, I very much wanted to be single because I wanted to make sure that none of that would ever happen again. And so,
but that's also in itself a conscious choice. So it's not like you.
But I chose to be single because I wanted to be in a relationship, right? Because I knew that I had discovered there were forces in me that was so strong that I was powerless to do anything about that kind of reactivity. So I had to work on myself to make sure that in my next relationship, that wouldn't happen again.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying it won't happen at all, but I'm saying I had to come to a point where
you were able to be,
where I was able to be in those triggers in a more constructive way.
Yeah. And
to use it to become free of them. And so that's we were talking earlier, that's one of the reasons why I worked a lot on loneliness, because why did I what is the word? Why did I treat my partner the way I did? I did it because I felt lonely, and I felt like she wasn't helping me take away my loneliness, and I felt like that was her job as my partner.
To fill the gap of.
I felt, and you laugh, but a lot of people feel that way.
No, I'm not actually laughing about that.
Because
I'm actually just like seeing it kind of thing, because
right.
it is very much present. in a lot of relationships.
Indeed.
You're not alone there for sure.
And that's a natural thing because many people choose relationships because they think it's the cure for being lonely. But loneliness does not go away because of a relationship.
No.
And actually comes up in the relationship, and then what do you do? And I attacked. That's what I did.
Yeah.
And this loneliness was so much for me that's how I acted. So afterwards, when I chose to be single, I chose to spend a lot of time alone and to sort of sink into that feeling, because I needed to know that when I felt lonely or abandoned, and abandonment is a part of it, when I felt lonely or abandoned in a relationship, I could still be happy on my own, and I didn't have to punish my partner for it. I needed to know that because...
ask that from her, kind of thing.
Well, it's not so much, I suppose, ask it from her, because I don't think anyone can take away someone else's loneliness, even if they try.
Yeah.
How do you do it? You can't do it. It's an emotion. You can make unreasonable emotional demands, right? But even that's not going to make you feel better. It's just going to make the other person feel worse. So for me, I've been single for, I think, 3 years now. And I'm coming up on the point where, I've already said, I've told the universe, I'm expecting to find a partner here in 23. That's what I want to do. And I am expecting her to come along. And
so if anyone listening,
and that's because I've come to the point now.
Single.
I've come to the point now where I know that I'll have a different kind of awareness when it comes to my personal triggers.
Yeah.
I know they'll still be there. I will for sure still be triggered. But now there are things that I trust myself to act on them differently, and not to become emotionally unreasonable towards the other person, at least not all the time, and at least not to a degree where I'll feel ashamed afterwards for lashing out. Yeah. Lashing out, that was the word I was looking for earlier.
Lashing out. And that's like, been part of the work that you've done on yourself, like heavily, you could say, especially with like this, going right into this thing of the aloneness.
Sometimes I think, and this is a very private thing actually. Sometimes I think that all the spiritual work I do is so that I can be worthy of love someday. but not worthy of love in terms of the eyes of the other person, because people love us, right? They love us despite how terrible we are. So being loved is not so difficult, but it is difficult to feel worthy of that love in your own eyes. It's difficult to feel that you are being the person you want to be in a relationship.
Well, yeah.
And that is what I want to be, because I've always tried to be the person I wanted to be, and I found in relationships I was very far from that. So sometimes I wonder if all this spiritual work is just so that one day when I find the right partner, I can be good to them as I want to be. But who knows?
That's a pretty incredible thing to kind of to work towards, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Or to kind of to one. I've really enjoyed this conversation about emotional work and some of the stuff that's come up in both of our lives, and how it's been both quite heavily related to relationships.
Yeah.
And
it's a universal experience, a lot of this human stuff.
Definitely. And if you're like most people who are either in a relationship or have been, then I'm sure you can relate to the strong, deep emotions that come up.
Yeah.
In at times in relationships. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it's pretty clear to see that what we both kind of have come experience in our lives is this, that, learning how to navigate these emotions has been absolutely fundamental in opening up to ourselves, and also to the work we've both done in being where we are today.
For sure.
That's either been through our own kind of work that we've done on ourselves, or seeking a therapist as well, to kind of help navigate the emotional kind of pain that can come up, and that journey. So, yeah. Is there anything you would like to add, Tillman, to the?
No, I think this is a pretty good ending point, and I think we should move closer to the fire now. I'm getting a little cold.
100% good idea.
So I think this is the end of the first episode of Conversations from the Yurt. And we'll see you a little closer to the fire.